The silence stretched across Naval Air Station Fallon like a held breath. 14 instructors stood motionless on the flight line, their eyes fixed on a sight that shouldn't exist. The FA-18F Super Hornet touched down with impossible precision, its hook catching the arresting wire with surgical accuracy. But this wasn't what froze them in place. It was the approach that defied everything they knew about physics and flying. Commander Jake "Viper" Morrison had been training naval aviators for 12 years. He'd seen hotshot pilots attempt carrier landings that would make angels weep. He'd watched seasoned veterans shake their heads at impossible approaches. But he'd never seen anything like what Lieutenant Kestrel "Ghost" Nakamura had just accomplished. The radio crackled. "Tower, Ghost 77 requesting permission to taxi." The voice was steady, almost bored, as if she hadn't just executed a landing that violated every principle in the book while somehow being textbook perfect. Morrison's headset buzzed. "Sir," the tower controller's voice carried confusion. "How do we log this?" Ghost had approached from the northwest during a crosswind that was grounding experienced pilots. Weather reports showed gusts at 42 knots, visibility dropping to 2 miles in desert dust. Standard protocol called for holding patterns until conditions improved. Ghost had requested immediate approach. "Negative, Ghost 77, weather's below minimums." "Tower, I have the field in sight, requesting approach." "Ghost 77, stand by." Morrison had grabbed the radio himself. This was Lieutenant Nakamura's first carrier simulation landing at Fallon. She'd been transferred from helicopter training, a washout according to her file. The brass wanted her gone quietly. Give her impossible conditions, let her fail, transfer her to logistics. "Ghost 77, you're cleared for approach. Wind 270 at 45, gusting to 50. What happened next rewrote Morrison's understanding of flying. Ghost had descended through the storm like it was calm air. Her Super Hornet tracked the center line as if guided by rails. In 45-knot crosswinds, she held approach speed within 2 knots. Her touchdown was so precise it seemed computer-controlled. Now she taxied past the line of instructors, canopy still down. Through the reinforced glass, they glimpsed a slight figure in standard flight gear. No showboating. No acknowledgement of what she'd just accomplished. The aircraft disappeared into the hangar. "Who is she?" whispered Lieutenant Commander Sarah Icebox Chen. Morrison pulled Ghost's file from his tablet. The record was thin, almost deliberately sparse. Previous assignment, search and rescue, Alaska. Reason for transfer, administrative. Flight hours, classified. Emergency responses, classified. But there was something else. A single notation buried in medical records. Survivor, Flight 447. Morrison's blood chilled. Everyone in naval aviation knew Flight 447. Ghost 77 wasn't just another pilot. She was the girl who fell from the sky and lived to fly again. The mystery on the tarmac was just the beginning. The real story lay buried in Alaskan ice and the kind of loss that breaks most people. But Kestrel Nakamura wasn't most people. And what the instructors were about to discover would change everything they thought they knew about courage, skill, and the price of becoming untouchable in the sky. The storm was just starting. 2 hours after the impossible landing, Commander Morrison sat in his office staring at a computer screen that might as well have been written in code. Ghost's personnel file read like a redacted intelligence document, black bars where explanations should be, classifications where details belonged. What he could piece together painted an impossible picture. Kestrel Nakamura, age 26, born in Anchorage to a Japanese-American father and Norwegian mother, enlisted at 18, rated for helicopter operations within 6 months, a process that typically took 2 years, posted to Coast Guard Station Kodiak for search and rescue. Then the black bars started. 3 years of SAR missions marked only with coordinates and casualty counts. Rescues logged as successful with no details. Weather conditions listed as extreme across dozens of operations. Her helicopter, a modified HH-60 Jayhawk, had more flight hours than aircraft twice its age. The pattern emerged slowly. Ghost flew when no one else could. When storms grounded entire squadrons, when visibility dropped to zero, when ice formed on rotors fast enough to kill, that's when they sent Kestrel. Her success rate was statistical impossibility, 97%. Morrison reached for his coffee and found his hand shaking slightly. He'd flown combat missions over Iraq. He'd landed jets on carriers in 40-foot swells, but something about this file unsettled him in ways he couldn't name. The knock on his door came precisely at 1600 hours. "Enter." Lieutenant Nakamura stood at attention in the doorway. Without her helmet and oxygen mask, she looked younger than her file suggested. Japanese features from her father, Nordic height from her mother. Her dark hair was regulation length but somehow managed to look deliberately styled. Her eyes held something Morrison recognized from combat veterans, a particular stillness that came from seeing too much. "Sir," Lieutenant Nakamura, reporting as ordered. "At ease, Lieutenant, have a seat." She remained standing. "Sir, if this is about the approach." The approach was textbook perfect. For the first time, something flickered across her expression. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. "Sir." "Sit down, Nakamura. We need to talk." She took the chair across from his desk with precise movements. Military bearing so ingrained it looked natural. "Your file," Morrison said, gesturing at his screen, "is interesting reading." "Sir, I'm not sure what you mean." "Flight 447. The change was instantaneous. Her posture remained perfect, but something behind her eyes went completely flat. Morrison had seen the same expression on POW faces, a shutting down, a withdrawal to somewhere unreachable. "Sir, that's classified." "The incident report isn't. Commercial flight from Anchorage to Seattle. Cargo plane carrying humanitarian supplies. Lost power in a storm over Prince William Sound. All souls presumed lost." Ghost said nothing. Except one passenger survived. 19-year-old Coast Guard recruit who spent 4 days on an ice shelf before rescue. Hypothermia, exposure, multiple fractures. Morrison leaned forward. "Want to know what I find interesting about that survivor?" Still silence. She requested immediate return to flight status, from a hospital bed, with 2 broken ribs and frostbite. Ghost's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The crash investigation was sealed. Survivor testimony was classified. But here's what I know about impossible landings, Lieutenant. They usually come from people who have already experienced impossible survival. "Sir, I'm here to learn carrier operations." Morrison smiled grimly. "No, Lieutenant. You're here because someone wants you gone, and after today's performance I think I know why." "Sir?" "Because you make everyone else look mortal." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. The ready room buzzed with the particular energy of pilots dissecting an impossible flight. Kestrel sat in the back corner, maintenance manual open, ignoring the conversation swirling around her like competing radio frequencies. Crosswind component was 53 knots, measured. Impossible to maintain glide slope in those conditions. Flew helicopters in Alaska, that explains the... Explains nothing. Helicopters don't land like that. Lieutenant Commander Rick Maverick Torres held court near the coffee station, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never doubted his own expertise. "Look, I'm not saying it wasn't impressive, but let's be honest about what we saw. Lucky approach in marginal conditions. We've all had them." Murmurs of agreement from the younger pilots. The kind of consensus that forms when exceptional performance makes everyone else uncomfortable. Weather was definitely a factor, added Lieutenant Brad Iceman Williams. Once you're below the turbulence, approach is pretty straightforward. Ghost turned a page in her manual. FA-18F Emergency Procedures, Section 3.4, Engine Failure During Approach. She'd memorized it years ago, but reading gave her hands something to do. Still, Torres continued, we should probably review approach procedures with our transfer student. Make sure she understands the difference between Coast Guard operations and real naval aviation. The room's energy shifted. Kestrel felt 14 pairs of eyes find her position in the corner. The weight of judgment, familiar as an old uniform. Something to add, Lieutenant. Tor's voice carried the particular challenge of a pilot who'd never failed at anything important. Ghost looked up from her manual, met his gaze with the steady expression that had unnerved instructors all day. No, sir. Good, because tomorrow we're going to work on standard approaches. By the book, no cowboy moves. The dismissal was clear. Ghost returned to her reading while conversations resumed around her, but the tone had changed. What started as professional curiosity had hardened into something else, the casual cruelty of excellence protecting its own territory. She'd seen it before. In Alaska, when she'd pulled survivors from conditions that grounded rescue helicopters. The grateful acknowledgement followed quickly by questions about protocol, about risk assessment, about whether proper procedures had been followed. As if survival itself was somehow inappropriate. Lieutenant Sarah Chen approached during the evening brief. Ice-blue eyes, platinum blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun, the kind of precision that suggested everything about her flying was similarly exact. Kestrel. Lieutenant. Call me Sarah, we're all pretty informal here. She settled into the adjacent chair. Listen, I wanted to apologize for the guys. They get territorial about new pilots. Understood. Rick especially. He's a good stick, but he takes the competition thing seriously. Chen's voice dropped slightly. Between you and me, he's been trying to set the course record since he got here. Today's landing probably didn't help his ego. Ghost nodded noncommittally. Want some advice? Sure. Play it straight for a few weeks. Standard approaches, regulation, everything. Let them get comfortable, then show them what you can really do. Chen smiled like she was offering insider knowledge, as if Ghost's flying was some kind of performance requiring audience management. Thanks for the heads up. We girls have to stick together, right? After Chen left, Ghost returned to her manual. Section 4.2, Multiple System Failures. The procedures were straightforward enough. Prioritize flight path, identify critical systems, execute emergency landing checklist. What the manual didn't cover was flying with one engine, no hydraulics, and electrical fire while your instructor pilot was unconscious and your aircraft was inverted at 400 feet. Some lessons only came from falling. Dawn arrived over Fallen like a crimson warning. Kestrel stood on the flight line watching maintenance crews prepare aircraft for the day's training sorties. Her breath formed small clouds in the desert air, a reminder of other mornings in other places where cold meant something different entirely. The FA-18F assigned to her today bore the number 204, fresh from overnight inspection. She performed her pre-flight walk-around with methodical precision, checking control surfaces, examining ordnance pylons, running fingers along leading edges for damage or debris. Ghost 77, you're up. Commander Morrison's voice carried across the tarmac. He approached with a clipboard and the expression of someone who'd made a decision that might be a mistake. Sir, weather's cooperating today. 15-knot crosswind, visibility unlimited, should be routine. Ghost nodded. They both knew routine was a relative concept. Lieutenant Torres will be your flight lead. Standard formation approach, then individual pattern work. Morrison paused. "He's a good pilot, Nakamura. Don't make him look bad." The warning was gentle but clear. Play well with others. Torres appeared from the ready room, flight suit crisp, helmet bag slung over his shoulder with practiced casualness. His aircraft, number 117, sat 20 yards away in pristine condition. "Morning, Ghost. Ready to see how we do things at Fallen?" "Yes, sir." "Good, we'll brief in the jet. Keep it simple. Standard two-ship formation, approach speed 250, call the ball when you have it. Questions?" "No, sir." "Outstanding, let's fly." The startup sequence felt familiar despite the different aircraft. Engines spooling to life, avionics systems initializing, radio checks with the tower. Ghost ran through her mental checklist while monitoring Tor's preparations in the adjacent aircraft. Ghost 77, Maverick 11 radio check. Loud and clear 11. Tower, Maverick flight requesting taxi. Maverick flight, taxi to runway 09, wind 080 at 15. The taxi to the active runway gave Ghost time to study the airfield layout. 2 parallel runways, arresting gear positioned for carrier simulation training, mobile control tower providing approach guidance. Standard setup, but the desert mountains surrounding Fallen created unique challenges for approach patterns. Torres held short of the runway while completing final checks. Through her canopy, Ghost could see him running through procedures with the confidence of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Maverick flight, you're cleared for takeoff. Maverick 11 rolling. Torres advanced his throttles smoothly, twin engines pushing his Super Hornet down the runway with gathering speed. Ghost waited for the prescribed interval, then followed. The FA-18F lifted off runway 9 with reluctant grace, weight of fuel and training equipment making it climb like a loaded freight train. But once airborne, the jet transformed into something predatory and responsive. Ghost felt the familiar satisfaction of controlling 40,000 pounds of engineered violence with subtle pressure on a stick. Ghost 77, join up on my right wing. She banked gently right, adjusting power and position until her aircraft settled into standard formation spacing. Through Tor's canopy, she could see him checking her position, making minor corrections to maintain precise alignment. They climbed to pattern altitude while Torres called out standard formation commands. Ghost responded with minimal acknowledgments, focusing on maintaining position while scanning instruments and monitoring radio traffic. But something felt different about this flight. Torres' radio calls carried an edge of performance, as if he were demonstrating proper procedures for an audience. His formation flying was textbook precise, but somehow aggressive, tighter spacing than necessary, sharper turns that required constant adjustment to maintain position. Ghost realized she was being tested, and Torres was setting the bar intentionally high. The first approach pattern revealed Torres' strategy. He flew with aggressive precision, steep descents, tight turns, approach speeds that required constant throttle adjustments to maintain proper formation spacing. Each maneuver was technically correct, but pushed to the edge of standard parameters. Ghost 77, can you keep up? The question carried casual condescension, pilot-to-pilot banter, with an underlying challenge. Ghost adjusted her throttles to maintain position as Torres rolled into another sharp turn. Affirm 1-1. Good, let's try something a little more dynamic. What followed was a masterclass in formation flying designed to expose limitations. Torres led them through a series of approaches that demanded split-second timing and precise aircraft control. Each pattern was more complex than the last. High-angle approaches, short final turns, power-on recoveries that tested engine response and pilot skill. Ghost matched every maneuver with mechanical precision. Not bad, Torres transmitted after their fourth approach. Let's see how you handle some solo work. Break right, enter standard left-hand pattern. Finally released from formation constraints, Ghost banked away from Tor's aircraft and set up for individual pattern work. The relief was immediate, no longer flying someone else's agenda, just her and the aircraft working through established procedures. Her first solo approach was deliberately standard. Proper altitude, correct airspeed, gentle descent to touchdown on the center line. Textbook execution that earned routine acknowledgement from the tower. Nice approach, Ghost 77. But as she climbed back to pattern altitude, Ghost heard Tor's radio call. Tower, Maverick 11 requesting demonstration approach. Maverick 11, cleared for demonstration approach. What followed was a display of pilot skill designed to establish dominance. Tor's flew a compressed pattern that violated several recommended minimums while remaining technically legal. His approach was fast, steep, and precisely controlled, the kind of flying that impressed observers and proved superior capability. His touchdown was firm but accurate, aircraft settling onto the runway with authority. How was that, Ghost 77? The challenge was explicit now. Match this if you can. Ghost keyed her radio. Tower, Ghost 77 requesting tactical approach. Silence stretched for several seconds. Tactical approaches were advanced maneuvers typically reserved for combat-experienced pilots. Authorization required instructor approval. Ghost 77, stand by. Morrison's voice cut through radio static. Ghost 77, you're cleared for tactical approach. Fly your aircraft. The last phrase carried special meaning among naval aviators. Trust your training, ignore the politics, do what needs to be done. Ghost rolled into a steep descending turn that brought her around the pattern in half the normal time. She approached the runway from an angle that should have been impossible to correct, bleeding altitude and airspeed with surgical precision. At 200 feet, traveling 90 degrees off runway heading, she rolled wings level and touched down exactly on center line. The radio was silent for 10 long seconds. Then Tor's voice, carefully controlled. Not bad, Ghost, for helicopter background. But Ghost had heard something else in his transmission. Uncertainty. The first crack in his confidence. And they both knew this was just the beginning. The debrief room felt smaller with tension filling the space between words. Tor sat at the head of the table, flight data displayed on monitors behind him, the authority of experience providing natural command presence. Ghost took a seat along the wall, notebook ready, the position of a student receiving instruction. Overall, solid flying, Tors began. Formation work needs refinement. You're a little loose on spacing during dynamic maneuvers, but that comes with practice. He clicked to the first data slide. Radar tracks showing their formation approaches. Ghost's aircraft appeared as a blue line following Tor's red path with minor deviations during turns and altitude changes. See these oscillations? That's overcorrection. In formation, smooth control inputs are everything. The trick is anticipating your flight lead's next move. Ghost nodded appropriately. The criticism was technically accurate. Her formation flying had been competent rather than elegant. But she understood the real message. Tors was establishing instructor-student hierarchy. Questions so far? No, sir. Good. The next slide showed individual approach patterns. Solo work showed better aircraft control. Standard approaches were acceptable, though we can tighten up the precision. Tors paused at the final radar track, Ghost's tactical approach. The line on screen showed an impossible path, steep descent, sharp angle correction, touchdown exactly on target. This maneuver, Tors studied the data with the expression of someone solving an unwelcome puzzle. Unconventional approach profile, probably not something we want to make habit of. Sorry. High angle of attack, excessive descent rate, late course correction. Technically successful, but multiple risk factors. His voice carried the weight of official assessment. In real carrier operations, approach discipline is everything. LSOs don't appreciate creative interpretations. Ghost absorbed the criticism without reaction. She'd heard similar assessments in Alaska, successful missions described in terms of procedural violations, lives saved dismissed as acceptable risk outcomes. Understood, sir. Don't get me wrong, you've got natural flying ability, but natural ability without discipline gets people killed. Tours closed the presentation. Tomorrow we'll work on standard approaches, build good habits before we attempt advanced maneuvers. After Tours left, Commander Morrison appeared in the doorway. Minute of your time, Lieutenant. Ghost gathered her notes and followed Morrison into the corridor. They walked in silence until reaching an observation deck overlooking the flight line. What did you think of today's session? Instructive, sir. Morrison smiled dryly. I'm sure it was. Tours is one of our best formation leaders, demanding instructor but fair. Ghost watched maintenance crews servicing aircraft below. The routine activity provided comfortable focus while navigating the subtext of Morrison's questions. He's also competitive as hell, Morrison continued. Takes pride in being the standard other pilots measure themselves against. Yes, sir. Your tactical approach got his attention. Ghost said nothing. Mine too. Where did you learn that maneuver? The question had been inevitable. Ghost had hoped to delay it longer, but Morrison's directness made evasion pointless. Alaska, sir. SAR operations required flexible approach techniques. Flexible, Morrison repeated the word like he was testing its weight. That's one way to describe it. Another way might be impossibly dangerous unless you're desperate enough to try anything. Sir, I've flown search and rescue, Lieutenant. I know what conditions require tactical approaches in civilian aircraft. Morrison's voice softened slightly. I also know what kind of missions are classified in SAR records. Ghost felt familiar ground shifting beneath her feet. The conversation was moving toward questions she couldn't answer and truths she couldn't share. Sir, my previous assignment is none of my business until it affects training here, which it clearly does. Morrison turned to face her directly. Here's what I need to know. Are you going to be a problem for my program? The question was unexpectedly direct. No, sir. Good, because talent like yours attracts attention, and attention attracts politics, and politics gets people transferred to places where talent doesn't matter. Ghost understood the warning. Yes, sir. Outstanding. Get some rest, Lieutenant. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. The officers' club at Fallen served mediocre food and excellent gossip. Ghost sat alone at a corner table, picking at a sandwich while half listening to conversations from nearby tables. The ambient noise provided comfortable anonymity, pilots discussing training schedules, weather conditions, weekend plans. She'd chosen the club over the base mess hall precisely for its social atmosphere. Alone in crowd rather than alone. The distinction mattered in ways she'd learned to appreciate during her Alaska assignment. Mind if we join you? Sarah Chen stood beside the table with another pilot Ghost recognized from the ready room. Lieutenant Jennifer Phoenix Martinez, an instructor pilot with the casual confidence of someone comfortable in her own skills. Sure. They settled into adjacent chairs with practiced ease. Chen placed her tray with geometric precision, while Martinez arranged her meal with casual efficiency. How was your first day of formation training? Chen asked. Educational. Rick can be intense, Martinez added. He means well, but he's got that whole Top Gun thing going on. Needs to prove he's the alpha dog. Ghost nodded noncommittally while continuing to eat. The conversation felt like reconnaissance disguised as friendly concern. We heard about your tactical approach, Chen continued. Caused quite a stir in the tower. Standard maneuver. Not around here, Martinez laughed. Most of us are still working up to advanced approaches. You made it look easy. The compliment carried undertones Ghost couldn't quite identify. Professional recognition mixed with something that might have been wariness. Beginner's luck. Right, Chen's smile suggested she wasn't buying the modesty. Where'd you say you were stationed before? Alaska Search and Rescue. Must have been interesting work. Ghost took another bite of sandwich rather than responding. The questions were becoming more direct, and her answers were becoming less informative, a dynamic that couldn't continue indefinitely. We looked up your record, Martinez said suddenly. It's pretty thin on details. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Ghost set down her sandwich and met Martinez's gaze directly. Most SAR operations are routine. Yours weren't. Chen leaned forward slightly. 97% success rate in Arctic conditions. That's not routine, that's exceptional. Ghost realized the conversation had been planned. Chen and Martinez hadn't randomly decided to join her for lunch. They'd coordinated an informal interrogation. Good training, good equipment, good team. Must have been some team. Martinez's tone suggested she wasn't satisfied with generic answers. We tried to find records of your unit's operations. Most of the mission reports are classified. SAR operations involve civilian casualties, privacy concerns. It was a reasonable explanation that explained nothing. Ghost watched both women process her non-answer with the expressions of people who'd expected more detailed information. Look, Chen said finally, we're not trying to hassle you, but you show up with helicopter background and start flying tactical approaches like you've been doing it for years. People have questions. What kind of questions? The kind that wonder whether you're really here for training or something else. Ghost understood the implication. In a community where everyone's background was scrutinized and debated, her classified record created suspicions about her real purpose at Fallen. I'm here to learn carrier operations. Okay, Martinez nodded slowly. But understand this is a tight community. We look out for each other. If you're not being straight with us, it affects everyone. The warning was delivered with professional courtesy but unmistakable firmness. Ghost appreciated the directness. I understand. After they left, Ghost finished her meal in renewed solitude. The conversation had been inevitable. Military communities didn't tolerate mystery indefinitely. But it also revealed something important about her situation at Fallen. Her flying had made her a question mark. And question marks made people nervous. 3 days of standard approaches had established a routine that satisfied no one. Tours led formation flights with mechanical precision. Ghost followed with competent conformity, and both sides maintained professional courtesy that fooled nobody. The weather held clear and calm, eliminating variables that might provide opportunities for distinction. Each pattern was textbook execution, each landing acceptable precision, each debrief professional acknowledgement of adequate performance. Ghost understood the strategy. Tours was creating a baseline of conventional competency that would make any deviation from standard procedures appear reckless or undisciplined. Meanwhile, she was demonstrating that exceptional flying could be constrained within normal parameters when required. Both sides were playing chess with aircraft. Commander Morrison watched from the tower during Thursday's afternoon session, his presence adding weight to what should have been routine training. Ghost caught glimpses of him through the tower windows during pattern work, motionless figure observing the careful dance of political flying. Ghost 77 cleared for approach. Ghost 77 cleared for approach. Her fifth pattern of the day proceeded with practiced regularity. Standard altitude, standard airspeed, standard everything. The approach was competent enough to satisfy regulatory requirements and boring enough to avoid unwanted attention. But as she turned final, Ghost noticed something that changed the equation entirely. A bird strike. Flock of seagulls, probably following maintenance vehicles around the airfield. One struck her port engine intake at precisely the wrong moment, just as she was reducing power for landing configuration. The engine didn't quit immediately. Instead, it began producing reduced power with irregular surges, creating exactly the kind of emergency that required immediate decision-making with no time for consultation. Ghost's training took over. She applied power to the starboard engine, adjusted control inputs to compensate for asymmetric thrust, and continued the approach while running emergency procedures from memory. Engine failure on approach priority 1. Maintain aircraft control. Tower Ghost 77 declaring emergency. Port engine malfunction. Ghost 77, state your intentions. Good question. Standard procedure called for climbing to safe altitude, circling to burn fuel, and attempting a straightened approach with emergency equipment standing by. Conservative approach that minimized risk and maximized safety margins. But Ghost was already committed to the approach with insufficient altitude for safe climb-out, and her damaged engine was producing enough power to maintain flight, but not enough to guarantee continued operation. She had perhaps 30 seconds to decide. Tower Ghost 77 continuing approach. Silence filled the radio for 2 heartbeats. Then Morrison's voice, Ghost 77, fly your aircraft. The approach that followed violated every standard procedure for single-engine operations. Ghost flew a compressed pattern that kept her within gliding distance of the runway, while managing power settings that kept her damaged engine operating within acceptable parameters. She touched down smoothly, deployed drag chutes, and taxied clear of the active runway before the emergency vehicles could respond. Total time from bird strike to emergency termination, 4 minutes. Outstanding job, Ghost 77, emergency equipment standing down. Ghost acknowledged the tower and taxied to parking, where maintenance crews were already positioning to inspect her aircraft. Through her canopy, she could see Torres landing from his own approach, probably wondering what had just happened. But as she shut down systems and prepared for post-flight inspection, Ghost realized something significant had changed. She just demonstrated emergency flying that made her tactical approaches look conservative by comparison. And she'd done it while Torres was watching. The chess game had just become significantly more complicated. The emergency landing brought immediate consequences Ghost hadn't anticipated. Within an hour of shutdown, her aircraft was surrounded by maintenance personnel, safety inspectors, and administrative staff documenting every detail of the incident. Command Master Chief Rodriguez appeared while Ghost was completing post-flight paperwork. His weathered face carried the expression of someone who'd seen enough emergencies to recognize exceptional flying when it occurred. Lieutenant, Master Chief, hell of a job up there. That approach should have been impossible with single-engine failure. Thank you, Master Chief. Been flying for 32 years. Never seen emergency handling like that. Rodriguez paused to study the damaged engine intake, where maintenance crews were extracting seagull remains. Course, most pilots would have taken the safe option. Climb out, circle around, full emergency approach. Ghost nodded. The implicit question was clear. Why hadn't she followed standard procedures? Didn't think the engine would hold together for extended flight. Good instinct. Compressor blade damage was worse than initial assessment indicated. Rodriguez gestured toward the exposed engine components. Another 5 minutes of operation might have resulted in complete failure. The information validated Ghost's split-second decision-making, but it also raised questions about how she'd assessed engine condition so accurately without diagnostic equipment. Experience. Rodriguez smiled. Must have been some experience. Your previous assignment involved many single-engine emergencies. The question was casual, but Ghost recognized the same curiosity that had driven Chen and Martinez to investigate her background. Her emergency flying was generating the kind of attention she'd hoped to avoid. Alaska presented challenging conditions. I bet it did. Rodriguez's expression suggested he understood more than he was revealing. Well, you handled it perfectly today. Textbook execution under pressure. After Rodriguez left, Ghost completed her paperwork and prepared to leave the flight line. But Torres intercepted her near the squadron building, his expression unreadable. Nice flying today. Thank you, sir. Emergency procedures looked familiar, like you'd practiced them before. The observation carried subtle accusation. Torres was suggesting her flying had been too polished for genuine emergency response. Sir, single-engine approaches are advanced maneuvers. Most pilots need extensive training before attempting them in actual emergency conditions. Torres studied Ghost with the intensity of someone solving a puzzle. You made it look routine. Ghost realized Torres was questioning whether the emergency had been genuine or staged demonstration. The suspicion was ridiculous but professionally dangerous. Bird strike wasn't planned, sir. Of course not, but your response was unusually confident. The conversation was approaching territory where Ghost's answers would either satisfy Torres' curiosity or increase his suspicions. She chose directness. Alaska SAR involved frequent engine failures, ice, weather, mechanical issues. Emergency flying was standard procedure. Torres absorbed this explanation with the expression of someone receiving unwelcome information. How many single-engine approaches? Didn't keep count, sir. Estimate. Ghost considered the question carefully. The truth would sound impossible. A conservative estimate would sound evasive. Maybe 30, 40. Torres' eyes widened slightly. 40 emergency landings. SAR missions often involved marginal aircraft in extreme conditions. Equipment failures were common. Jesus, Torres shook his head. No wonder you fly like that. Most of us practice emergencies in simulators. You lived them. For the first time since arriving at Fallen, Ghost heard something other than challenge in Torres' voice. Respect, maybe, or recognition of experience he couldn't match. Yes, sir. Well, Torres paused, clearly recalibrating his assessment. That explains a lot. Tomorrow we'll work on formation flying. Standard procedures, no emergencies. Yes, sir. But as Torres walked away, Ghost realized the emergency had fundamentally altered their dynamic. She was no longer an unknown quantity requiring evaluation. She was a pilot whose capabilities exceeded standard parameters. And that change would affect everything that followed. The next morning brought whether that transformed routine training into advanced instruction. Storm systems moving across Nevada had created conditions that grounded most civilian aircraft. 40-knot crosswinds, scattered thunderstorms, visibility varying between 2 miles and unlimited depending on precipitation cells. Ghost arrived at the ready room to find half the day's training flights canceled. The remaining sorties were reserved for experienced pilots flying essential missions or advanced training that required challenging conditions. Weather's marginal, Torres announced during the morning brief. We'll be flying in and out of storm cells, dealing with severe turbulence and rapidly changing winds. Anyone uncomfortable with today's conditions can reschedule without penalty. His gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on Ghost. The implicit question was clear. Was she ready for serious weather flying? Ghost reviewed her weather charts while other pilots discussed conditions. Surface winds were indeed challenging, but upper-level conditions showed standard storm patterns she'd navigated hundreds of times in Alaska. The difference was altitude. Jets flew above most weather rather than through it like helicopters. Ghost, you comfortable with today's mission? All eyes turned toward her. The question was professional courtesy, but the attention suggested her answer mattered beyond personal comfort. Yes, sir. Good. We'll be working formation flying in turbulent conditions. Spacing will be critical. Storm cells can create severe wind shear with minimal warning. The brief continued with detailed analysis of radar imagery, storm movement predictions, and emergency procedures for weather-related incidents. Ghost absorbed the information while mentally comparing it to conditions she'd considered routine in Alaska. 30 minutes later, they were strapped into aircraft that shook from wind gusts even while parked. The taxi to the runway required constant control.